From the Notebook of an Old Man by Anton Pavlovich Chekhov. And there is in Russia an emeritus professor, Nikolai Stepanovich, a chevalier and privy councillor. He has so many Russian and foreign decorations that, when he has occasion to put them on the students, nickname him the Eichenstand. His acquaintances are of the most aristocratic for the last 25 or 30 years at any rate. There has not been one single distinguished man of learning in Russia with whom he has not been intimately acquainted. There is no one for him to make friends with nowadays. But if we turn to the past, the long list of his famous friends winds up with such names as Pirogov Kavlin and the poet Nekrasov, all of whom bestowed upon him a warm and sincere affection. He is a member of all the Russian and of 3 foreign universities, and so on and so on. All that and a great deal more that might be said makes up what is called my name. That is my name as known to the public in Russia. It is known to every educated man, and abroad it is mentioned in the lecture room, with the addition honored and distinguished. It is one of those fortunate names to abuse which, or to take which in vain in public or in print, is considered a sign of bad taste. And that is as it should be. You see, my name is closely associated with the conception of a highly distinguished man of great gifts and unquestionable usefulness. I have the industry and power of endurance of a camel, and that is important, and I have talent which is even more important moreover. While I am on this subject, I am a well-educated, modest, and honest fellow. I have never poked my nose into literature or politics. I have never sought popularity in polemics with the ignorant. I have never made speeches either at public dinners or at the funerals of my friends. In fact, there is no slur on my learned name, and there is no complaint one can make against it. It is fortunate. The bearer of that name, that is, I see myself, as a man of 62 with a bald head with false teeth, and with an incurable tic douloureux. I am myself as dingy and unsightly as my name is brilliant and splendid my head, and my hands tremble with weakness my neck, as Turgenev says of one of his heroines, is like the handle of a double bass my chest, is hollow my shoulders narrow when I talk or lecture my mouth turns down at one corner, when I smile my whole face is covered with aged-looking deathly wrinkles. There is nothing impressive about my pitiful figure, only perhaps when I have an attack of tic douloureux my face wears a peculiar expression, the sight of which must have roused in every one the grim and impressive thought, evidently, that man will soon die. I still, as in the past, lecture fairly well. I can still, as in the past, hold the attention of my listeners for a couple of hours, my fervor the literary skill of my exposition, and my humor almost efface the defects of my voice. Though it is harsh, dry, and monotonous as a praying beggar's, I write poorly. That bit of my brain which presides over the faculty of authorship refuses to work. My memory has grown weak. There is a lack of sequence in my ideas, and when I put them on paper, it always seems to me that I have lost the instinct for their organic connection. My construction is monotonous, my language is poor and timid. Often I write what I do not mean. I have forgot the beginning when I am writing the end. Often I forget ordinary words, and I always have to waste a great deal of energy in avoiding superfluous phrases and unnecessary parentheses in my letters, both unmistakable proofs of a decline in mental activity. And it is noteworthy that the simpler the letter, the more painful the effort to write it. At a scientific article, I feel far more intelligent and at ease than at a letter of congratulation or a minute of proceedings. Another point, I find it easier to write German or English than to write Russian. As regards my present manner of life, I must give a foremost place to the insomnia from which I have suffered of late. If I were asked what constituted the chief and fundamental feature of my existence, now I should answer insomnia. As in the past, from habit I undress and go to bed exactly at midnight. I fall asleep quickly, but before 2 o'clock. I wake up and feel as though I had not slept at all. Sometimes I get out of bed and light a lamp for an hour or two. I walk up and down the room, looking at the familiar photographs and pictures. When I am weary of walking about, I sit down to my table. I sit motionless, thinking of nothing, conscious of no inclination. If a book is lying before me, I mechanically move it closer and read it without any interest. In that way, not long ago, I mechanically read through, in one night, a whole novel with the strange title, The Song the Lark Was Singing. Or to occupy my attention, I force myself to count to 1,000, or I imagine the face of one of my colleagues and begin trying to remember in what year and under what circumstances he entered the service. I like listening to sounds 2 rooms away from me. My daughter Lisa says something rapidly in her sleep, or my wife crosses the drawing room with a candle and invariably drops the matchbox, or a warped cupboard creaks, or the burner of the lamp suddenly begins to hum. And all these sounds, for some reason, excite me. To lie awake at night means to be at every moment conscious of being abnormal. And so I look forward with impatience to the morning and the day when I have a right to be awake. Many wearisome hours pass before the cock crows in the yard. He is my first bringer of good tidings. As soon as he crows, I know that within an hour the porter will wake up below, and coughing angrily will go upstairs to fetch something. And then a pale light will begin gradually glimmering at the windows, voices will sound in the street. The day begins for me with the entrance of my wife. She comes into me in her petticoat before she has done her hair, but after she has washed, smelling of flower-scented eau de cologne, looking as though she had come in by chance. Every time she says exactly the same thing: "Excuse me, I have just come in for a minute. Have you had a bad night again?" Then she puts out the lamp, sits down near the table, and begins talking. I am no prophet, but I know what she will talk about every morning. It is exactly the same thing. Usually, after anxious inquiries concerning my health, she suddenly mentions our son, who is an officer serving at Warsaw. After the 20th of each month, we send him 50 rubles, and that serves as the chief topic of our conversation. Of course, it is difficult for us, my wife would sigh, but until he is completely on his own feet, it is our duty to help him. The boy is among strangers. His pay is small, however. If you like, next month we won't send him 50, but 40. What do you think? Daily experience might have taught my wife that constantly talking of our expenses does not reduce them, but my wife refuses to learn by experience, and regularly, every morning discusses our officer's son, and tells me that bread, thank God, is cheaper, while sugar is a halfpenny dearer, with a tone and an air as though she were communicating interesting news. I listen mechanically, assent, and probably, because I have had a bad night, strange and inappropriate thoughts intrude themselves upon me. I gaze at my wife and wonder like a child. I ask myself in perplexity, is it possible that this old, very stout, ungainly woman, with her dull expression of petty anxiety and alarm about daily bread, with eyes dimmed by continual brooding over debts and money difficulties, who can talk of nothing but expenses, and who smiles at nothing but things getting cheaper, is it possible that this woman is no other than the slender Varia, whom I fell in love with so passionately, for her fine, clear intelligence, for her pure soul, her beauty, and as Othello, his Desdemona, for her sympathy for my studies? Could that woman be no other than the Varia who had once borne me a son? I look with strained attention into the face of this flabby, spiritless, clumsy old woman, seeking in her my Varia. But of her past self, nothing is left but her anxiety over my health and her manner of calling my salary our salary, and my cap our cap. It is painful for me to look at her, and to give her what little comfort I can. I let her say what she likes, and say nothing even when she passes unjust criticisms on other people or pitches into me for not having a private practice or not publishing textbooks. Our conversation always ends in the same way. My wife suddenly remembers with dismay that I have not had my tea. "What am I thinking about sitting here?" she says, getting up. "The samovar has been on the table ever so long, and here I stay gossiping. My goodness, how forgetful I am growing." She goes out quickly and stops in the doorway to say, "We owe Yeager 5 months' wages. Did you know it? You mustn't let the servants' wages run on. How many times I have said it. It's much easier to pay 10 rubles a month than 50 rubles every 5 months." As she goes out, she stops to say, "The person I am sorriest for is our Lisa. The girl studies at the conservatoire, always mixes with people of good position, and goodness knows how she is dressed. Her fur coat is in such a state, she is ashamed to show herself in the street. If she were somebody else's daughter, it wouldn't matter, but of course, everyone knows that her father is a distinguished professor, a privy councillor. And having reproached me with my rank and reputation, she goes away at last. That is how my day begins. It does not improve as it goes on. As I am drinking my tea, my Lisa comes in wearing her fur coat and her cap, with her music in her hand, already quite ready to go to the conservatoire. She is 22. She looks younger, is pretty, and rather like my wife in her young days. She kisses me tenderly on my forehead and on my hand and says, "Good morning, Papa. Are you quite well?" As a child, she was very fond of ice cream, and I used often to take her to a confectioner's. Ice cream was for her the type of everything delightful. If she wanted to praise me, she would say, "You are as nice as cream, Papa." We used to call one of her little fingers pistachio, ice the next cream, ice the third raspberry. And so, on, usually when she came in to say good morning to me, I used to sit her on my knee, kiss her little fingers, and say, "Creamy, ice pistachio, lemon." And now, from old habit, I kiss Lisa's fingers and mutter, "Pistachio." cream lemon, but the effect is utterly different. I am cold as ice. And I am ashamed when my daughter comes in to me and touches my forehead with her lips. I start, as though a bee had stung me on the head, give a forced smile, and turn my face away. Ever since I have been suffering from sleeplessness, a question sticks in my brain like a nail. My daughter often sees me, an old man, and a distinguished man, blush painfully at being in debt to my footman. She sees how often anxiety over petty debts forces me to lay aside my work and to walk up and down the room for hours together thinking. But why is it she never comes to me in secret to whisper in my ear, "Father, here is my watch, here are my bracelets, my earrings, my dresses, pawn them. All you want money." How is it that, seeing how her mother and I are placed in a false position and do our utmost to hide our poverty from people, she does not give up her expensive pleasure of music lessons? I would not accept her watch, nor her bracelets, nor the sacrifice of her lessons. God forbid. That isn't what I want. I think at the same time of my son, the officer at Warsaw. He is a clever, honest, and sober fellow. But that is not enough for me. I think if I had an old father, and if I knew there were moments when he was put to shame by his poverty, I should give up my officer's commission to somebody else and should go out to earn my living as a workman. Such thoughts about my children poison me. What is the use of them? It is only a narrow-minded or embittered man who can harbor evil thoughts about ordinary people, because they are not heroes, but enough of that. At 9:45, I have to go and give a lecture to my dear boys. I dress and walk along the road which I have known for 30 years, and which has its history for me. Here is the big gray house with the chemist's shop. At this point, there used to stand a little house, and in it was a beer shop. In that beer shop, I thought out my thesis and wrote my first love letter to Varia. I wrote it in pencil on a page headed Historia. More by. Here there is a grocer's shop. At one time, it was kept by a little Jew who sold me cigarettes on credit, then by a fat peasant woman who liked the students. Because every one of them has a mother now, there is a red-haired shopkeeper. Sitting in it, a very stolid man who drinks tea from a copper teapot. And here are the gloomy gates of the university, which have long needed doing up. I see the bored porter in his sheepskin, the broom, the drifts of snow on a boy coming fresh from the provinces, and imagining that the temple of science must really be a temple. Such gates cannot make a healthy impression. Altogether, the dilapidated condition of the university buildings, the gloominess of the corridors, the griminess of the walls, the lack of light, the dejected aspect of the steps, the hat stands, and the benches take a prominent position among predisposing causes in the history of Russian pessimism. Here is our garden. I fancy it has grown neither better nor worse since I was a student. I don't like it. It would be far more sensible if there were tall pines and fine oaks growing here, instead of sickly-looking limby trees, yellow acacias, and skimpy pollard lilacs. The student whose state of mind is in the majority of cases created by his surroundings ought, in the place where he is studying, to see facing him at every turn nothing but what is lofty, strong, and elegant. God preserve him from gaunt trees, broken windows, gray walls, and doors covered with torn American leather. When I go to my own entrance, the door is flung wide open, and I am met by my colleague, contemporary, and namesake, the porter Nikolay. As he lets me in, he clears his throat and says, "A frost, Your Excellency," or, "If my greatcoat is wet, rain, Your Excellency." Then he runs on ahead of me and opens all the doors on my way in my study. He carefully takes off my fur coat, and while doing so manages to tell me some bit of university news, thanks to the close intimacy existing between all the university porters and beadles. He knows everything that goes on in the four faculties, in the office, in the rector's private room, in the library. What does he not know when in an evil day a rector or dean, for instance, retires? I hear him, in conversation with the young porters, mention the candidates for the post, explain that such a one would not be confirmed by the minister, that another would himself refuse to accept it, then drop into fantastic details concerning mysterious papers received in the office, secret conversations alleged to have taken place between the minister and the trustee. And so on. With the exception of these details, he almost always turns out to be right. His estimates of the candidates, though original, are very correct too. If one wants to know in what year someone read his thesis, entered the service, retired, or died, then summon to your assistance the vast memory of that soldier, and he will not only tell you the year, the month, and the day, but will furnish you also with the details that accompanied this or that event. Only one who loves can remember like that. He is the guardian of the university traditions from the porters who were his predecessors, He has inherited many legends of university life, has added to that wealth much of his own gained during his time of service. And if you care to hear, he will tell you many long and intimate stories. He can tell one about extraordinary sages who knew everything about remarkable students who did not sleep for weeks, about numerous martyrs and victims of science with him. Good triumphs over evil, the weak always vanquishes the strong, the wise man, the fool, the humble, the proud, the young, the old. There is no need to take all these fables and legends for sterling coin, but filter them, and you will have left what is wanted, our fine traditions, and the names of real heroes recognized as such by all. In our society, the knowledge of the learned world consists of anecdotes of the extraordinary absent-mindedness of certain old professors, and two or three witticisms variously ascribed to Gruber, to me, and to Babukin for the educated public. That is not much if it loved science, learned men, and students, as Nicolay does. Its literature would long ago have contained whole epics, records of sayings and doings, such as unfortunately it cannot boast of now. After telling me a piece of news, Nicolay assumes a severe expression, and conversation about business begins. If any outsider could at such times overhear Nicolay's free use of our terminology, he might perhaps imagine that he was a learned man disguised as a soldier. And by the way, the rumors of the erudition of the university porters are greatly exaggerated. It is true that Nicolay knows more than 100 Latin words, knows how to put the skeleton together, sometimes prepares the apparatus, and amuses the students by some long-learned quotation. But the by no means complicated theory of the circulation of the blood, for instance, is as much a mystery to him now as it was 20 years ago. At the table in my study, bending low over some book or preparation, sits Pyotr Ignatievich, my demonstrator, a modest and industrious, but by no means clever man of 35, already bald and corpulent. He works from morning to night, reads a lot, remembers well everything he has read. And in that way he is not a man, but pure gold. In all else he is a cart horse, or in other words, a learned dullard. The cart horse characteristics that show his lack of talent are these: his outlook is narrow and sharply limited by his specialty. Outside his special branch, he is simple as a child. Fancy what a misfortune, they say Skoblev is dead. Nikolay crosses himself, but Pyotr Ignatievich turns to me and asks, "What Skoblev is that?" Another time somewhat earlier I told him that Professor Perov was dead. Good Pyotr Ignatievich asked, "What did he lecture on?" I believe if Patty had sung in his very ear, if a horde of Chinese had invaded Russia, if there had been an earthquake, he would not have stirred a limb, but screwing up his eye would have gone on calmly, looking through his microscope. What is he to Hecuba, or Hecuba to him? In fact, I would give a good deal to see how this dry stick sleeps with his wife at night. Another characteristic is his fanatical faith in the infallibility of science, and above all of everything written by the Germans, he believes in himself, in his preparations, knows the object of life, and knows nothing of the doubts and disappointments that turn the hair of talent gray. He has a slavish reverence for authorities, and a complete lack of any desire for independent thought. To change his convictions is difficult, to argue with him, impossible. How is one to argue with a man who is firmly persuaded that medicine is the finest of sciences, that doctors are the best of men, and that the traditions of the medical profession are superior to those of any other of the evil past of medicine? Only one tradition has been preserved: white tie, still worn by doctors for a learned. In fact, for any educated man, the only traditions that can exist are those of the university as a whole, with no distinction between medicine, law, etc. But it would be hard for Pyotr Ignatievich to accept these facts, and he is ready to argue with you till the day of judgment. I have a clear picture in my mind of his future. In the course of his life, he will prepare many hundreds of chemicals of exceptional purity. He will write a number of dry and very accurate memoranda, will make some dozen conscientious translations, but he won't do anything striking. To do that, one must have imagination, inventiveness, the gift of insight, and Pyotr Ignatievich has nothing of the kind. In short, he is not a master in science, but a journeyman. Pyotr Ignatievich, Nikolay and I talk in subdued tones. We are not quite ourselves. There is always a peculiar feeling, when one hears through the doors a murmur as of the sea from the lecture theatre. In the course of 30 years, I have not grown accustomed to this feeling, and I experience it every morning. I nervously button up my coat, ask Nikolay unnecessary questions, lose my temper. It is just as though I were frightened. It is not timidity, though, but something different which I can neither describe nor find a name for. Quite unnecessarily, I look at my watch and say, well, it's time to go in. And we march into the room in the following order: foremost goes Nikolay with the chemicals and apparatus, or with a chart after him I come. And then the cart horse follows humbly with hanging head, or when necessary, a dead body is carried in first on a stretcher followed by Nikolay, and so on my entrance. The students all stand up, then they sit down, and the sound as of the sea is suddenly hushed, stillness reigns. I know what I am going to lecture about, but I don't know how I am going to lecture, where I am going to begin, or with what I am going to end. I haven't a single sentence ready in my head, but I have only to look round the lecture hall. It is built in the form of an amphitheater, and utter the stereotyped phrase last lecture we stopped at, when sentences spring up from my soul in a long string, and I am carried away by my own eloquence. I speak with irresistible rapidity and passion, and it seems as though there were no force which could check the flow of my words. To lecture well, that is with profit to the listeners, and without boring themon, must have besides talent, experience, and a special knack. One must possess a clear conception of one's own powers, of the audience to which one is lecturing, and of the subject of one's lecture. Moreover, one must be a man who knows what he is doing. One must keep a sharp lookout, and not for 1 second lose sight of what lies before one. A good conductor, interpreting the thought of the composer, does 20 things at once: reads the score, waves his baton, watches the singer, makes a motion sideways, first to the drum, then to the wind instruments. And so on. I do just the same when I lecture before me. 150 faces, all unlike one another, 300 eyes, all looking straight into my face. My object is to dominate this many-headed monster. If every moment as I lecture I have a clear vision of the degree of its attention and its power of comprehension, it is in my power. The other foe I have to overcome is in myself. It is the infinite variety of forms, phenomena, laws, and the multitude of ideas of my own and other people's, conditioned by them. Every moment I must have the skill to snatch out of that vast mass of material what is most important and necessary, and as rapidly as my words flow, clothe my thought in a form in which it can be grasped by the monster's intelligence and may arouse its attention. And at the same time, one must keep a sharp lookout that one's thoughts are conveyed not just as they come, but in a certain order essential for the correct composition of the picture I wish to sketch further. I endeavor to make my diction literary, my definitions brief and precise, my wording as far as possible simple and eloquent. Every minute I have to pull myself up and remember that I have only an hour and 40 minutes at my disposal. In short, one has one's work cut out at one and the same minute. One has to play the part of savant and teacher and orator. And it's a bad thing if the orator gets the upper hand of the savant or of the teacher in one, or vice versa. You lecture for a quarter of an hour, for half an hour, when you notice that the students are beginning to look at the ceiling at Pyotr Ignatievich. One is feeling for his handkerchief, another shifts in his seat, another smiles at his thoughts. That means that their attention is flagging. Something must be done. Taking advantage of the first opportunity, I make some pun. A broad grin comes on to 150 faces, the eyes shine brightly. The sound of the sea is audible for a brief moment. I laugh too, their attention is refreshed, and I can go on. No kind of sport, no kind of game or diversion has ever given me such enjoyment as lecturing. Only at lectures have I been able to abandon myself entirely to passion, and have understood that inspiration is not an invention of the poets, but exists in real life. And I imagine Hercules, after the most piquant of his exploits, felt just such voluptuous exhaustion as I experience after every lecture. That was in old times. Now at lectures, I feel nothing but torture. Before half an hour is over, I am conscious of an overwhelming weakness in my legs and my shoulders. I sit down in my chair. But I am not accustomed to lecture sitting down. A minute later, I get up and go on standing, then sit down again. There is a dryness in my mouth, my voice grows husky, my head begins to go round. To conceal my condition from my audience, I continually drink water, cough, often blow my nose, as though I were hindered by a cold, make puns inappropriately, and in the end break off earlier than I ought to. But above all, I am ashamed. My conscience and my intelligence tell me that the very best thing I could do now would be to deliver a farewell lecture to the boys, to say my last word to them, to bless them, and give up my post to a man younger and stronger than me. But God be my judge, I have not manly courage enough to act according to my conscience. Unfortunately, I am not a philosopher, and not a theologian. I know perfectly well that I cannot live more than another 6 months. It might be supposed that I ought now to be chiefly concerned with the question of the shadowy life beyond the grave and the visions that will visit my slumbers in the tomb. But for some reason my soul refuses to recognize these questions, though my mind is fully alive to their importance. Just as 20-30 years ago, so now, on the threshold of death, I am interested in nothing but science as I yield up my last breath. I shall still believe that science is the most important, the most splendid, the most essential thing in the life of man, that it always has been, and will be the highest manifestation of love, and that only by means of it will man conquer himself. And nature, this faith is perhaps naive, and may rest on false assumptions. But it is not my fault that I believe that, and nothing else. I cannot overcome in myself this belief. But that is not the point. I only ask people to be indulgent to my weakness, and to realize that to tear from the lecture theater, and his pupils a man who is more interested in the history of the development of the bone medulla than in the final object of creation, would be equivalent to taking him and nailing him up in his coffin without waiting for him to be dead. Sleeplessness and the consequent strain of combating increasing weakness leads to something strange in me. In the middle of my lecture, tears suddenly rise in my throat, my eyes begin to smart, and I feel a passionate hysterical desire to stretch out my hands before me and break into loud lamentation. I want to cry out in a loud voice that I, a famous man, have been sentenced by fate to the death penalty, that within some 6 months another man will be in control here in the lecture theater. I want to shriek that I am poisoned. New ideas, such as I have not known before, have poisoned the last days of my life, and are still stinging my brain like mosquitoes. And at that moment, my position seems to me so awful that I want all my listeners to be horrified, to leap up from their seats, and to rush in panic terror with desperate screams to the exit. It is not easy to get through such moments. Roman 2. After my lecture, I sit at home and work. I read journals and monographs, or prepare my next lecture. Sometimes, I write something. I work with interruptions, as I have from time to see visitors. There is a ring at the bell. It is a colleague come to discuss some business matter with me. He comes in to me with his hat and his stick, and holding out both these objects to me says, only for a minute, sit down, colleague, only a couple of words. To begin with, we both try to show each other that we are extraordinarily polite and highly delighted to see each other. I make him sit down in an easy chair, and he makes me sit down. As we do so, we cautiously pat each other on the back, touch each other's buttons, and it looks as though we were feeling each other, and afraid of scorching our fingers. Both of us laugh, though we say nothing. Amusing, when we are seated, we bow our heads towards each other, and begin talking in subdued voices, however affectionately disposed we may be to one another. We cannot help adorning our conversation with all sorts of Chinese mannerisms, such as you so justly observed, or I have already had the honor to inform you. We cannot help laughing if one of us makes a joke, however unsuccessfully. When we have finished with business, my colleague gets up impulsively, and waving his hat in the direction of my work, begins to say goodbye again. We paw one another and laugh. I see him into the hall when I assist my colleague to put on his coat, while he does all he can to decline this high honor. Then, when Yeager opens the door, my colleague declares that I shall catch cold, while I make a show of being ready to go even into the street with him. And when at last I go back into my study, my face still goes on smiling, I suppose from inertia. A little later, another ring at the bell. Somebody comes into the hall, and is a long time coughing and taking off his things. Yeager announces a student. I tell him to ask him in a minute later. A young man of agreeable appearance comes in. For the last year he and I have been on strained relations. He answers me disgracefully at the examinations, and I mark him one every year. I have some 7 such hopefuls, whom to express it in the students' slang, chivy or floor. Those of them who fail in their examination through incapacity or illness usually bear their cross patiently, and do not haggle with me. Those who come to the house and haggle with me are always youths of sanguine temperament, broad natures, whose failure at examinations spoils their appetites and hinders them from visiting the opera with their usual regularity. I let the first class off easily, but the second I chivy through a whole year. Sit down, I say to my visitor. What have you to tell me? Excuse me, professor, for troubling you. He begins, hesitating, and not looking me in the face. I would not have ventured to trouble you if it had not been I have been up for your examination 5 times, and have been plowed. I beg you be so good as to mark me for a pass, because the argument which all the sluggards bring forward on their own behalf is always the same. They have passed well in all their subjects, and have only come to grief in mine, and that is the more surprising, because they have always been particularly interested in my subject, and knew it so well. Their failure has always been entirely owing to some incomprehensible misunderstanding. Excuse me, my friend, I say to the visitor, I cannot mark you for a pass. Go and read up the lectures and come to me again. then we shall see. A pause, I feel an impulse to torment the student a little for liking beer and the opera better than science, and I say with a sigh. To my mind, the best thing you can do now is to give up medicine altogether. If with your abilities you cannot succeed in passing the examination, it's evident that you have neither the desire nor the vocation for a doctor's calling. The sanguine youth's face lengthens. Excuse me, Professor, he laughs, but that would be odd of me to say the least of it, after studying for 5 years all at once to give it up. Oh, well, better to have lost your 5 years than have to spend the rest of your life in doing work you do not care for. But at once I feel sorry for him, and I hasten to add, however, as you think best, and so read a little more and come again. When the idle youth asks in a hollow voice, when you like tomorrow, if you like. And in his good-natured eyes I read, I can come all right, but of course you will plow me again, you beast. Of course, I say you want no more science for going in for my examination another 15 times, but it is training your character, and you must be thankful for that. Silence follows. I get up and wait for my visitor to go, but he stands and looks towards the window, fingers his beard, and thinks it grows boring. The sanguine youth's voice is pleasant and mellow, his eyes are clever and ironical, his face is genial, though a little bloated from frequent indulgence in beer and overlong. Lying on the sofa he looks, as though he could tell me a lot of interesting things about the opera, about his affairs of the heart, and about comrades whom he likes unluckily. It is not the thing to discuss these subjects, or else I should have been glad to listen to him. Professor, I give you my word of honor, that if you mark me for a pass Roman, 1 I Roman 100. As soon as we reach the word of honor, I wave my hands and sit down to the table. The student ponders a minute longer and says dejectedly, in that case, goodbye, I beg your pardon. Goodbye, my friend, good luck to you. He goes irresolutely into the hall, slowly puts on his outdoor things, and going out into the street probably ponders for some time longer, unable to think of anything except old devil, inwardly addressed to me. He goes into a wretched restaurant to dine and drink beer, and then home to bed. Peace be to thy ashes, honest toiler. A third ring at the bell, a young doctor in a pair of new black trousers, gold spectacles, and of course a white tie walks in. He introduces himself. I beg him to be seated and ask what I can do for him. Not without emotion, the young devotee of science begins, telling me that he has passed his examination as a doctor of medicine, and that he has now only to write his dissertation. He would like to work with me under my guidance, and he would be greatly obliged to me if I would give him a subject for his dissertation. Very glad to be of use to you, colleague, I say, but just let us come to an understanding. As to the meaning of a dissertation, that word is taken to mean a composition, which is a product of independent creative effort. Is that not so? A work written on another man's subject, and under another man's guidance, is called something different. The doctor says nothing. I fly into a rage and jump up from my seat. Why is it you all come to me? I cry angrily. Do I keep a shop? I don't deal in subjects. For the 1001th time, I ask you all to leave me in peace. Excuse my brutality, but I am quite sick of it. The doctor remains silent, but a faint flush is apparent on his cheekbones. His face expresses a profound reverence for my fame and my learning. But from his eyes, I can see he feels a contempt for my voice, my pitiful figure, and my nervous gesticulation. I impress him in my anger as a queer fish. I don't keep a shop, I go on angrily, and it is a strange thing. Why don't you want to be independent? Why have you such a distaste for independence? I say a great deal, but he still remains silent. By degrees, I calm down, and of course give in. The doctor gets a subject from me for his theme, not worth a halfpenny, writes under my supervision, a dissertation of no use to anyone with dignity, defends it in a dreary discussion, and receives a degree of no use to him. The rings at the bell may follow one another endlessly, but I will confine my description here to 4 of them. The bell rings for the 4th time, and I hear familiar footsteps, the rustle of a dress, a dear voice. 18 years ago, a colleague of mine, an oculist, died, leaving a little daughter, Katia, a child of 760,000 rubles in his will. He made me the child's guardian. Till she was 10 years old, Katia lived with us as one of the family. Then she was sent to a boarding school, and only spent the summer holidays with us. I never had time to look after her education. I only superintended it at leisure moments, and so I can say very little about her childhood. The first thing I remember, and like so much in remembrance, is the extraordinary trustfulness with which she came into our house. and let herself be treated by the doctors a trustfulness, which was always shining in her little face. She would sit somewhere out of the way, with her face tied up, invariably watching something with attention, whether she watched me writing, or turning over the pages of a book, or watched my wife bustling about, or the cook scrubbing a potato in the kitchen, or the dog playing her eyes, invariably expressed the same thought that, is everything that is done in this world is nice and sensible. She was curious and very fond of talking to me. Sometimes she would sit at the table opposite me watching my movements, and asking questions it interested her, to know what I was reading, what I did at the university, whether I was not afraid of the dead bodies, what I did with my salary. Do the students fight at the university? She would ask. They do, dear. And do you make them go down on their knees? Yes, I do. And she thought it funny that the students fought, and I made them go down on their knees. And she laughed. She was a gentle, patient, good child. It happened not infrequently that I saw something taken away from her, saw her punished without reason, or her curiosity repressed. At such times a look of sadness was mixed with the invariable expression of trustfulness on her face. That was all. I did not know how to take her part. Only when I saw her sad, I had an inclination to draw her to me, and to commiserate her like some old nurse, my poor little orphan one. I remember too that she was fond of fine clothes, and of sprinkling herself with scent in that respect. She was like me. I too am fond of pretty clothes and nice scent. I regret that I had not time nor inclination to watch over the rise and development of the passion, which took complete possession of Katia when she was 14 or 15. I mean her passionate love for the theater. When she used to come from boarding school and stay with us for the summer holidays, she talked of nothing with such pleasure and such warmth as of plays and actors. She bored us with her continual talk of the theater. My wife and children would not listen to her. I was the only one who had not the courage to refuse to attend to her. When she had a longing to share her transports, she used to come into my study and say in an imploring tone, "Nikolay Stepanovich, do let me talk to you about the theater." I pointed to the clock and said, "I'll give you half an hour, Bajin." Later on, she used to bring with her dozens of portraits of actors and actresses, which she worshipped. Then she attempted several times to take part in private theatricals, and the upshot of it all was that, when she left school, she came to me and announced that she was born to be an actress. I had never shared Katia's inclinations for the theater. To my mind, if a play is good, there is no need to trouble the actors in order that it may make the right impression. It is enough to read it. If the play is poor, no acting will make it good. In my youth, I often visited the theater, and now my family takes a box twice a year and carries me off for a little distraction. Of course, that is not enough to give me the right to judge of the theater. In my opinion, the theater has become no better than it was 30 or 40 years ago. Just as in the past, I can never find a glass of clean water in the corridors or foyers of the theater. Just as in the past, the attendants fine me 20 kopecks for my fur coat, though there is nothing reprehensible in wearing a warm coat in winter. As in the past, for no sort of reason, music is played in the intervals, which adds something new and uncalled for to the impression made by the play. As in the past, men go in the intervals and drink spirits in the buffet. If no progress can be seen in trifles, I should look for it in vain in what is more important. When an actor, wrapped from head to foot in stage traditions and conventions, tries to recite a simple ordinary speech, to be or not to be, not simply, but invariably with the accompaniment of hissing and convulsive movements all over his body, or when he tries to convince me at all costs that Tchatsky, who talks so much with fools and is so fond of folly, is a very clever man, and that Woe from Wit is not a dull play, the stage gives me the same feeling of conventionality which bored me so much 40 years ago, when I was regaled with the classical howling and beating on the breast, and every time I come out of the theater more conservative than I go in. The sentimental and confiding public may be persuaded that the stage, even in its present form, is a school, but anyone who is familiar with a school in its true sense will not be caught with that bait. I cannot say what will happen in 50 or 100 years, but in its actual condition, the theater can serve only as an entertainment. But this entertainment is too costly to be frequently enjoyed. It robs the state of thousands of healthy and talented young men and women who, if they had not devoted themselves to the theater, might have been good doctors, farmers, schoolmistresses, officers. It robs the public of the evening hours, best time for intellectual work and social intercourse. I say nothing of the waste of money and the moral damage to the spectator when he sees murder, fornication, or false witness, unsuitably treated on the stage. Katia was of an entirely different opinion. She assured me that the theater, even in its present condition, was superior to the lecture hall, to books, or to anything in the world. The stage was a power that united in itself. All the arts and actors were missionaries. No art nor science was capable of producing so strong and so certain an effect on the soul of man as the stage. And it was with good reason that an actor of medium quality enjoys greater popularity than the greatest savant or artist, and no sort of public service could provide such enjoyment and gratification as the theater. And one fine day, Katia joined a troupe of actors, and went off, I believe, to Ufa, taking away with her a good supply of money, a store of rainbow hopes, and the most aristocratic views of her work. Her first letters on the journey were marvelous. I read them, and was simply amazed that those small sheets of paper could contain so much youth, purity of spirit, holy innocence, and at the same time, subtle and apt judgments, which would have done credit to a fine masculine intellect. It was more like a rapturous paean of praise she sent me than a mere description of the Volga, the country, the towns she visited, her companions, her failures and successes. Every sentence was fragrant with that confiding trustfulness I was accustomed to read in her face, and, at the same time, there were a great many grammatical mistakes, and there was scarcely any punctuation at all. Before 6 months had passed, I received a highly poetical and enthusiastic letter, beginning with the words, "I have come to love." This letter was accompanied by a photograph representing a young man with a shaven face, a wide-brimmed hat, and a plaid flung over his shoulder. The letters that followed were as splendid as before, but now commas and stops made their appearance in them. The grammatical mistakes disappeared, and there was a distinctly masculine flavor about them. Katia began writing to me how splendid it would be to build a great theater somewhere on the Volga, on a cooperative system, and to attract to the enterprise the rich merchants and the steamer owners. There would be a great deal of money in it, there would be vast audiences, the actors would play on cooperative terms. Possibly all this was really excellent, but it seemed to me that such schemes could only originate from a man's mind. However that may have been, for a year and a half, everything seemed to go well. Katia was in love, believed in her work, and was happy. But then I began to notice in her letters unmistakable signs of falling off. It began with Katia's complaining of her companions. This was the first and most ominous symptom. If a young scientific or literary man begins his career with bitter complaints of scientific and literary men, it is a sure sign that he is worn out and not fit for his work. Katia wrote to me that her companions did not attend the rehearsals, and never knew their parts. That one could see in every one of them an utter disrespect for the public in the production of absurd plays, and in their behavior on the stage, that, for the benefit of the Actors' Fund, which they only talked about, actresses of the serious drama demeaned themselves by singing chansonnettes, while tragic actors sang comic songs, making fun of deceived husbands and the pregnant condition of unfaithful wives. And so on. In fact, it was amazing that all this had not yet ruined the provincial stage, and that it could still maintain itself on such a rotten and unsubstantial footing. In answer, I wrote Katia a long, and I must confess, a very boring letter. Among other things, I wrote to her: I have more than once happened to converse with old actors, very worthy men, who showed a friendly disposition towards me. From my conversations with them, I could understand that their work was controlled not so much by their own intelligence and free choice as by fashion and the mood of the public. The best of them had had to play in their day in tragedy, in operetta, in Parisian farces, and in extravaganzas, and they always seemed equally sure that they were on the right path and that they were of use. So, as you see, the cause of the evil must be sought not in the actors, but more deeply in the art itself, and in the attitude of the whole of society to it. This letter of mine only irritated Katia. She answered me: You and I are singing parts out of different operas. I wrote to you not of the worthy men who showed a friendly disposition to you, but of a band of knaves who have nothing worthy about them. They are a horde of savages who have got on the stage simply because no one would have taken them elsewhere, and who call themselves artists simply because they are impudent. There are numbers of dull-witted creatures, drunkards, intriguing schemers, and slanderers, but there is not one person of talent among them. I cannot tell you how bitter it is to me that the art I love has fallen into the hands of people. I detest how bitter it is that the best men look on it evil from afar, not caring to come closer, and instead of intervening write ponderous commonplaces and utterly useless sermons, and so on, all in the same style. A little time passed, and I got this letter. I have been brutally deceived. I cannot go on living dispose of my money, as you think best. I loved you as my father, and my only friend. Goodbye. It turned out that he too belonged to the horde of savages. Later on, from certain hints, I gathered that there had been an attempt at suicide. I believe Katia tried to poison herself. I imagine that she must have been seriously ill afterwards, as the next letter I got was from Yalta, where she had most probably been sent by the doctors. Her last letter contained a request to send her 1,000 rubles to Yalta as quickly as possible, and ended with these words: "Excuse the gloominess of this letter. Yesterday, I buried my child. After spending about a year in the Crimea, she returned home. She had been about 4 years on her travels, and during those 4 years, I must confess, I had played a rather strange and unenviable part in regard to her, when in earlier days she had told me she was going on the stage, and then wrote to me of her love when she was periodically overcome by extravagance, and I continually had to send her first one, and then 2,000 rubles when she wrote to me of her intention of suicide, and then of the death of her baby. Every time I lost my head, and all my sympathy for her sufferings found no expression, except that after prolonged reflection, I wrote long, boring letters which I might just as well not have written, and yet I took a father's place with her, and loved her like a daughter. Now Katia is living less than half a mile off. She has taken a flat of 5 rooms, and has installed herself fairly comfortably. And in the taste of the day, if anyone were to undertake to describe her surroundings, the most characteristic note in the picture would be indolence for the indolent body. There are soft lounges, soft stools for indolent feet, soft rugs for indolent eyes, faded, dingy, or flat colors for the indolent soul. The walls are hung with a number of cheap fans and trivial pictures, in which the originality of the execution is more conspicuous than the subject. And the room contains a multitude of little tables and shelves, filled with utterly useless articles of no value and shapeless rags, in place of curtains. All this together with the dread of bright colors, of symmetry, and of empty space bears witness not only to spiritual indolence, but also to a corruption of natural taste. For days together, Katia lies on the lounge, reading principally novels and stories. She only goes out of the house once a day in the afternoon to see me. I go on working while Katia sits silent not far from me on the sofa, wrapping herself in her shawl, as though she were cold, either because I find her sympathetic, or because I was used to her frequent visits. When she was a little girl, her presence does not prevent me from concentrating my attention. From time to time, I mechanically ask her some question. She gives very brief replies, or to rest for a minute, I turn round and watch her, as she looks dreamily at some medical journal or review, and at such moments I notice that her face has lost the old look of confiding trustfulness. Her expression now is cold, apathetic, and absent-minded, like that of passengers who had to wait too long for a train. She is dressed as in old days, simply and beautifully, but carelessly. Her dress and her hair show visible traces of the sofas and rocking chairs in which she spends whole days at a stretch, and she has lost the curiosity she had in old days. She has ceased to ask me questions now, as though she had experienced everything in life and looked for nothing new from it. Towards 4 o'clock, there begins to be sounds of movement in the hall, and in the drawing room Lisa has come back from the conservatoire and has brought some girlfriends in with her. We hear them playing on the piano, trying their voices, and laughing in the dining room. Yeager is laying the table with the clatter of crockery. "Goodbye," said Katia. "I won't go in and see your people today. They must excuse me. I haven't time. Come and see me." While I am seeing her to the door, she looks me up and down grimly, and says with vexation, "You are getting thinner and thinner. Why don't you consult a doctor? I'll call at Sergei Fyodorovich's and ask him to have a look at you." "There's no need, Katia. I can't think where your people's eyes are. They are a nice lot, I must say." She puts on her fur coat abruptly, and as she does so 2 or 3 hairpins drop unnoticed on the floor from her carelessly arranged hair. She is too lazy, and in too great a hurry to do her hair up. She carelessly stuffs the falling curls under her hat and goes away. When I go into the dining room, my wife asks me, "Was Katia with you just now? Why didn't she come in to see us? It's really strange." Mama Lisa says to her reproachfully, "Let her alone. If she doesn't want to, we are not going down on our knees to her. It's very neglectful anyway to sit for 3 hours in the study without remembering our existence, but of course she must do as she likes." Varya and Lisa both hate Katia. This hatred is beyond my comprehension, and probably one would have to be a woman in order to understand it. I am ready to stake my life, that of the 150 young men I see every day in the lecture theater, And of the 100 elderly ones I meet every week hardly one could be found capable of understanding their hatred and aversion for Katia's past that is for her having been a mother without being a wife, and for her having had an illegitimate child, and at the same time, I cannot recall one woman or girl of my acquaintance who would not consciously or unconsciously harbor such feelings, and this is not because woman is purer or more virtuous than man, why virtue and purity are not very different from vice, if they are not free from evil feeling. I attribute this simply to the backwardness of woman, the mournful feeling of compassion, and the pang of conscience, experienced by a modern man at the sight of suffering, is to my mind far greater proof of culture and moral elevation than hatred and aversion. Woman is as tearful and as coarse in her feelings now as she was in the Middle Ages, and to my thinking those who advise that she should be educated like a man are quite right. My wife also dislikes Katia for having been an actress, for ingratitude, for pride, for eccentricity, and for the numerous vices which one woman can always find in another. Besides my wife and daughter and me, there are dining with us 2 or 3 of my daughter's friends, and Alexander Adolphovich, Necker her admirer and suitor. He is a fair-haired young man under 30 of medium height, very stout, and broad-shouldered with red whiskers near his ears and little waxed mustaches which make his plump, smooth face look like a toy. He is dressed in a very short reefer jacket, a flowered waistcoat, breeches very full at the top, and very narrow at the ankle, with a large check pattern on them, and yellow boots without heels. He has prominent eyes like a crab's. His cravat is like a crab's neck, and I even fancy there is a smell of crab soup about the young man's whole person. He visits us every day, but no one in my family knows anything of his origin, nor of the place of his education, nor of his means of livelihood. He neither plays nor sings, but has some connection with music and singing, sells somebody's pianos somewhere, is frequently at the conservatoire, is acquainted with all the celebrities, and is a steward at the concerts. He criticizes music with great authority, and I have noticed that people are eager to agree with him. Rich people always have dependents hanging about them. The arts and sciences have the same. I believe there is not an art nor a science in the world free from foreign bodies, after the style of this Mr. Necker. I am not a musician, and possibly I am mistaken in regard to Mr. Necker, of whom, indeed, I know very little but his air of authority and the dignity with which he takes his stand beside the piano, when anyone is playing or singing, strike me as very suspicious. You may be ever so much of a gentleman and a privy councillor, but if you have a daughter, you cannot be secure of immunity from that petty bourgeois atmosphere which is so often brought into your house and into your mood by the attentions of suitors, by matchmaking and marriage. I can never reconcile myself, for instance, to the expression of triumph on my wife's face every time Necker is in our company, nor can I reconcile myself to the bottles of Lafitte port and sherry, which are only brought out on his account, that he may see with his own eyes the liberal and luxurious way in which we live. I cannot tolerate the habit of spasmodic laughter Lisa has picked up at the conservatoire, and her way of screwing up her eyes whenever there are men in the room. Above all, I cannot understand why a creature utterly alien to my habits, my studies, my whole manner of life, completely different from the people I like, should come and see me every day, and every day should dine with me. My wife and my servants mysteriously whisper that he is a suitor, but still, I don't understand his presence. It rouses in me the same wonder and perplexity, as if they were to set a Zulu beside me at the table. And it seems strange to me, too, that my daughter, whom I am used to thinking of as a child, should love that cravat, those eyes, those soft cheeks. In the old days, I used to like my dinner, or at least was indifferent about it. Now it excites in me no feeling but weariness and irritation. Ever since I became an excellency, and one of the deans of the faculty, my family has, for some reason, found it necessary to make a complete change in our menu and dining habits. Instead of the simple dishes to which I was accustomed when I was a student, and when I was in practice, now they feed me with a puree, with little white things like circles floating about in it, and kidneys stewed in Madeira. My rank as a general and my fame have robbed me forever of cabbage soup and savory pies, and goose with applesauce and bream with boiled grain. They have robbed me of our maidservant Agasha, a chatty and laughter-loving old woman, instead of whom Yeager, a dull-witted and conceited fellow with a white glove on his right hand, waits at dinner. The intervals between the courses are short, but they seem immensely long because there is nothing to occupy them. There is none of the gaiety of the old days, the spontaneous talk, the jokes, the laughter. There is nothing of mutual affection, and the joy which used to animate the children, my wife and me, when in old days we met together at meals. For me, the The celebrated man of science dinner was a time of rest and reunion, and for my wife and children a fete brief indeed but bright and joyous, which they knew that for half an hour I belonged not to science, not to students, but to them alone. Our real exhilaration from one glass of wine is gone, forever gone, is agasha gone the bream, with boiled grain gone the uproar, that greeted every little startling incident at dinner, such as the cat and dog fighting under the table or Katia's bandage falling off her face into her soup plate. To describe our dinner nowadays is as uninteresting as to eat it. My wife's face wears a look of triumph, an affected dignity, and her habitual expression of anxiety. She looks at our plates and says, "I see you don't care for the joint. Tell me you don't like it, do you?" And I am obliged to answer, "There is no need for you to trouble, my dear. The meat is very nice." And she will say, "You always stand up for me, Nikolay Stepanovich. And you never tell the truth. Why is Alexander Adolphovich eating so little?" And so on in the same style. All through dinner Lisa laughs spasmodically and screws up her eyes. I watch them both, and it is only now at dinner that it becomes absolutely evident to me that the inner life of these two has slipped away out of my ken. I have a feeling as though I had once lived at home with a real wife and children, and that now I am dining with visitors in the house of a sham wife who is not the real one, and am looking at a Lisa who is not the real Lisa. A startling change has taken place in both of them. I have missed the long process by which that change was effected, and it is no wonder that I can make nothing of it. Why did that change take place? I don't know. Perhaps the whole trouble is that God has not given my wife and daughter the same strength of character as me. From childhood, I have been accustomed to resisting external influences, and have steeled myself pretty thoroughly. Such catastrophes in life as fame, the rank of a general, the transition from comfort to living beyond our means, acquaintance with celebrities, etc., have scarcely affected me, and I have remained intact and unashamed. But on my wife and Lisa, who have not been through the same hardening process and are weak, all this has fallen like an avalanche of snow, overwhelming them. Necker and the young ladies talk of fugues, of counterpoint, of singers and pianists, of Bach and Brahms, while my wife, afraid of their suspecting her of ignorance of music, smiles to them sympathetically and mutters, "That's exquisite." Really, you don't say so. Necker eats with solid dignity, jests with solid dignity, and condescendingly listens to the remarks of the young ladies from time to time. He is moved to speak in bad French, and then for some reason or other he thinks it necessary to address me as Vater Excellence. And I am glum. Evidently, I am a constraint to them, and they are a constraint to me. I have never in my earlier days had a close knowledge of class antagonism, but now I am tormented by something of that sort. I am on the lookout for nothing but bad qualities in Necker. I quickly find them, and am fretted at the thought that a man not of my circle is sitting here as my daughter's suitor. His presence has a bad influence on me in other ways too. As a rule, when I am alone, or in the society of people, I like never think of my own achievements, or if I do recall them, they seem to me as trivial as though I had only completed my studies yesterday. But in the presence of people like Necker, my achievements in science seem to be a lofty mountain, the top of which vanishes into the clouds, while at its foot Neckers are running about, scarcely visible to the naked eye. After dinner, I go into my study, and there smoke my pipe, the only one in the whole day, the sole relic of my old bad habit of smoking from morning till night. While I am smoking, my wife comes in and sits down to talk to me just as in the morning. I know beforehand what our conversation is going to be about. "I must talk to you seriously, Nikolay Stepanovich," she begins. "I mean about Lisa. Why don't you pay attention to it?" "To what?" "You pretend to notice nothing. But that is not right. We can't shirk responsibility. Necker has intentions in regard to Lisa. What do you say?" "That he is a bad man, I can't say because I don't know him, but that I don't like him, I have told you 1,000 times already." "But you can't." She gets up and walks about in excitement. "You can't take up that attitude to a serious step," she says, "when it is a question of our daughter's happiness. We must lay aside all personal feeling. I know you do not like him. Very good. If we refuse him now, if we break it all off, how can you be sure that Lisa will not have a grievance against us all? Her life suitors are not plentiful nowadays, goodness knows, and it may happen that no other match will turn up. He is very much in love with Lisa, and she seems to like him. Of course, he has no settled position, but that can't be helped. Please God, in time he will get one. He is of good family and well off." "Where did you learn that?" "He told us so. His father has a large house in Kharkov and an estate in the neighborhood. In short, Nikolay Stepanovich, you absolutely must go to Kharkov." "What for?" You will find out all about him there. You know the professors there, they will help you. I would go myself. But I am a woman, I cannot. I am not going to Kharkov, I say morosely. My wife is frightened, and a look of intense suffering comes into her face. For God's sake, Nikolay Stepanovich, she implores me with tears in her voice, for God's sake, take this burden off me, I am so worried. It is painful for me to look at her. Very well, Varya, I say affectionately, if you wish it, then certainly, I will go to Kharkov and do all you want. She presses her handkerchief to her eyes and goes off to her room to cry, and I am left alone. A little later, lights are brought in the armchair, and the lampshade cast familiar shadows that have long grown wearisome on the walls and on the floor, and when I look at them, I feel as though the night had come, and with it my accursed sleeplessness. I lie on my bed, then get up and walk about the room, then lie down again. As a rule, it is after dinner at the approach of evening that my nervous excitement reaches its highest pitch. For no reason, I begin crying and burying my head in the pillow. At such times, I am afraid that someone may come in. I am afraid of suddenly dying. I am ashamed of my tears. And altogether, there is something insufferable in my soul. I feel that I can no longer bear the sight of my lamp, of my books, of the shadows on the floor. I cannot bear the sound of the voices coming from the drawing room. Some force unseen, uncomprehended, is roughly thrusting me out of my flat. I leap up, hurriedly dress, and cautiously, that my family may not notice, slip out into the street. Where am I to go? The answer to that question has long been ready in my brain: to Katia. Romans 3. As a rule, she is lying on the sofa, or in a lounge chair reading. Seeing me, she raises her head, languidly sits up, and shakes hands. You are always lying down, I say, after pausing and taking breath. That's not good for you. You ought to occupy yourself with something. What? I say you ought to occupy yourself in some way. With what? A woman can be nothing but a simple workwoman or an actress. Well, if you can't be a workwoman, be an actress. She says nothing. You ought to get married, I say, half in jest. There is no one to marry, there's no reason to either. You can't live like this. Without a husband, much that matters, I could have as many men as I like if I wanted to. That's ugly, Katia. What is ugly? Why, what you have just said. Noticing that I am hurt, and wishing to efface the disagreeable impression, Katia says, let us go, come this way. She takes me into a very snug little room, and says, pointing to the writing table, look, I have got that ready for you. You shall work here, come here every day, and bring your work with you. They only hinder you there at home. Will you work here? Will you like to? Not to wound her by refusing, I answer that I will work here, and that I like the room very much. Then, we both sit down in the snug little room and begin talking. The warm, snug surroundings, and the presence of a sympathetic person, does not, as in old days, arouse in me a feeling of pleasure, but an intense impulse to complain and grumble. I feel, for some reason, that if I lament and complain, I shall feel better. Things are in a bad way with me, my dear, very bad. What is it? You see how it is, my dear. The best and holiest right of kings is the right of mercy, and I have always felt myself a king. Since I have made unlimited use of that right, I have never judged, I have been indulgent, I have readily forgiven every one right and left where others have protested and expressed indignation. I have only advised and persuaded. All my life it has been my endeavor that my society should not be a burden to my family, to my students, to my colleagues, to my servants, and I know that this attitude to people has had a good influence on all who have chanced to come into contact with me, but now I am not a king. Something is happening to me that is only excusable in a slave day. At night my brain is haunted by evil thoughts and feelings, such as I never knew before, are brooding in my soul. I am full of hatred and contempt and indignation, and loathing and dread. I have become excessively severe, exacting, irritable, ungracious, suspicious. Even things that in old days would have provoked me only to an unnecessary jest, and a good-natured laugh now, arouse an oppressive feeling in me. My reasoning, too, has undergone a change. In old days, I despised money. Now I harbor an evil feeling, not towards money, but towards the rich, as though they were to blame. In old days I hated violence and tyranny, but now I hate the men who make use of violence as though they were alone to blame, and not all of us, who do not know how to educate each other. What is the meaning of it? If these new ideas and new feelings have come from a change of convictions, what is that change due to? Can the world have grown worse and I better, or was I blind before? and indifferent if this change is the result of a general decline of physical and intellectual powers. I am ill, and every day I am losing weight. Me position is pitiable. It means that my new ideas are morbid and abnormal. I ought to be ashamed of them and think them of no consequence. Illness has nothing to do with it, Katia. Interrupts me. It's simply that your eyes are opened, that's all you have seen. What in old days, for some reason, you refused to see. To my thinking, what you ought to do first of all is to break with your family for good and go away. You are talking nonsense. You don't love them, why should you force your feelings? Can you call them a family non-entities? If they died today, no one would notice their absence tomorrow. Katia despises my wife and Lisa as much as they hate her. One can hardly talk at this date of people's having a right to despise one another. But if one looks at it from Katia's standpoint and recognizes such a right, one can see she has as much right to despise my wife and Lisa as they have to hate her. Non-entities, she goes on, have you had dinner today? How was it they did not forget to tell you? It was ready. How is it they still remember your existence? Katia, I say sternly, I beg you to be silent. You think I enjoy talking about them? I should be glad not to know them at all. Listen, my dear, give it all up and go away. Go abroad, the sooner the better. What nonsense! What about the university? The university too, what is it to you? There's no sense in it anyway. You have been lecturing for 30 years, and where are your pupils? Are many of them celebrated scientific men? Count them up. And to multiply the doctors who exploit ignorance and pile up hundreds of thousands for themselves, there is no need to be a good and talented man. You are not wanted. Good heavens, how harsh you are! I cry in horror, how harsh you are! Be quiet, or I will go away. I don't know how to answer the harsh things you say. The maid comes in and summons us to tea at the samovar. Our conversation, thank God, changes. After having had my grumble out, I have a longing to give way to another weakness of old age reminiscences. I tell Katia about my past, and to my great astonishment tell her incidents which till then I did not suspect of being still preserved in my memory. And she listens to me with tenderness, with pride, holding her breath. I am particularly fond of telling her how I was educated in a seminary and dreamed of going to the university. At times, I used to walk about our seminary garden. I would tell her. If from some faraway tavern the wind floated sounds of a song, and the squeaking of an accordion, or a sledge with bells dashed by the garden fence, it was quite enough to send a rush of happiness, filling not only my heart, but even my stomach, my legs, my arms. I would listen to the accordion or the bells dying away in the distance, and imagine myself a doctor, and paint pictures one better than another. And here, as you see, my dreams have come true. I have had more than I dared to dream of. For 30 years, I have been the favorite professor. I have had splendid comrades. I have enjoyed fame and honor. I have loved, married from passionate love, have had children. In fact, looking back upon it, I see my whole life as a fine composition arranged with talent. Now all that is left to me is not to spoil the end, for that I must die like a man. If death is really a thing to dread, I must meet it as a teacher, a man of science, and a citizen of a Christian country, ought to meet it with courage and untroubled soul. But I am spoiling the end, I am sinking, I fly to you, I beg for help. And you tell me sink, that is what you ought to do. But here there comes a ring at the front door, Katia, and I recognize it and say, it must be Mihail Fyodorovich. And a minute later my colleague, the philologist Mihail Fyodorovich, a tall, well-built man of 50, clean-shaven, with thick gray hair and black eyebrows, walks in. He is a good-natured man and an excellent comrade. He comes of a fortunate and talented old noble family, which has played a prominent part in the history of literature and enlightenment. He is himself intelligent, talented, and very highly educated, but has his oddities to a certain extent. We are all odd and all queer fish, but in his oddities, there is something exceptional, apt to cause anxiety among his acquaintances. I know a good many people for whom his oddities completely obscure his good qualities. Coming into us, he slowly takes off his gloves and says in his velvety bass, "Good evening, are you having tea? That's just right, it's diabolically cold." Then he sits down to the table, takes a glass, and at once begins talking. What is most characteristic in his manner of talking is the continually jesting tone, a sort of mixture of philosophy and drollery. As in Shakespeare's Gravediggers, he is always talking about serious things, but he never speaks seriously. His judgments are always harsh and railing, but thanks to his soft, even jesting tone, the harshness and abuse do not jar upon the ear, and one soon grows used to them. Every evening, He brings with him 5 or 6 anecdotes from the university, and he usually begins with them when he sits down to table. "Oh Lord," he sighs, twitching his black eyebrows, ironically, "what comic people there are in the world." "Well," asks Kadia, "as I was coming from my lecture this morning, I met that old idiot, NN, on the stairs. He was going along as usual, sticking out his chin like a horse, looking for someone to listen to his grumblings at his migraine at his wife, and his students who want to attend his lectures. Oh, I thought he has seen me. I am done, for now it is all up." And so on in the same style, or he will begin like this. "I was yesterday at our friend ZZ's public lecture. I wonder how it is our alma mater don't speak of it after dark dare display in public such noodles and pat dullards as that ZZY. He is a European fool, upon my word. You could not find another like him all over Europe. He lecturesque and you imagine he is, though he were sucking a sugar stick. Susu, he is in a nervous funk. He can hardly decipher his own manuscript. His poor little thoughts crawl along like a bishop on a bicycle. And what's worse, you can never make out what he is trying to say. The deadly dullness is awful. The very flies expire. It can only be compared with the boredom in the assembly hall, at the yearly meeting, when the traditional address is readmit. And at once an abrupt transition. 3 years ago, Nikolay Stepanovich here will remember it. I had to deliver that address. It was hot, stifling. My uniform cut me under the arms. It was deadly. I read for half an hour, for an hour, for an hour and a half, for 2 hours. Come, I thought, thank God, there are only 10 pages left. And at the end there were 4 pages that there was no need to read, and I reckoned to leave them out. So there are only 6 really. I thought, that is only 6 pages left to read, but only. Fancy, I chanced to glance before me, and sitting in the front row side by side, were a general with a ribbon on his breast, and a bishop. The poor beggars were numb with boredom. They were staring with their eyes wide open to keep awake, and yet they were trying to put on an expression of attention, and to pretend that they understood what I was saying, and liked it well. I thought, since you like it, you shall have it. It'll pay you out. So I just gave them those 4 pages too. As is usual with ironical people, when he talks nothing and his face smiles, but his eyes and eyebrows at such times, there is no trace of hatred or spite in his eyes, but a great deal of humor, and that peculiar fox-like slyness which is only to be noticed in very observant people. Since I am speaking about his eyes, I notice another peculiarity in them, when he takes a glass from Katia, or listens to her speaking or looks after her. As she goes out of the room for a moment, I notice in his eyes something gentle, beseeching. The maidservant takes away the samovar, and puts on the table a large piece of cheese, some fruit, and a bottle of Crimean champagne, rather poor wine of which Katia had grown fond in the Crimea. Mihail Fyodorovitch takes 2 packs of cards off the whatnot, and begins to play patience. According to him, some varieties of patience require great concentration and attention, yet while he lays out the cards he does not leave off distracting his attention with talk. Katia watches his cards attentively, and more by gesture than by words helps him in his play. She drinks no more than a couple of wineglasses of wine the whole evening. I drink 4 glasses, and the rest of the bottle falls to the share of Mihail Fyodorovitch, who can drink a great deal and never get drunk. Over our patience, we settle various questions, principally of the higher order, and what we care for most of all, that is science and learningis, more roughly handled than anything. Science, thank God, has outlived its day, says Mihail Fyodorovitch, emphatically. Its song is sung. Yes, indeed, mankind begins to feel impelled to replace it by something different. It has grown on the soil of superstition, been nourished by superstition, and is now just as much the quintessence of superstition as its defunct grandams, alchemy, metaphysics, and philosophy. And after all, what has it given to mankind? Why, the difference between the learned Europeans and the Chinese, who have no science, is trifling, purely external. The Chinese know nothing of science, but what have they lost thereby? Flies know nothing of science either, I observe, but what of that? There is no need to be angry, Nikolay Stepanovich. I only say this here between ourselves. I am more careful than you think. And I am not going to say this in public. God forbid. The superstition exists in the multitude that the arts and sciences are superior to agriculture, commerce superior to handicrafts. Our sect is maintained by that superstition, and it is not for you and me to destroy it. God forbid. After patience, the younger generation comes in for addressing too. Our audiences have degenerated, sighs Mihail Fyodorovitch, not to speak of ideals, and all the rest of it, if only they were capable of work and rational thought. In fact, it's a case of I look with mournful eyes on the young men of today. Yes, they have degenerated horribly. Katia agrees. Tell me, have you had one man of distinction among them for the last 5 or 10 years? I don't know how it is with the other professors, but I can't remember any among mine. I have seen in my day many of your students and young scientific men, and many actors well. I have never once been so fortunate as to meet I want say a hero or a man of talent, but even an interesting man, it's all the same gray mediocrity puffed up with self-conceit. All this talk of degeneration always affects me, as though I had accidentally overheard offensive talk about my own daughter. It offends me that these charges are wholesale and rest on such worn-out commonplaces, on such wordy vaporings as degeneration, and absence of ideals, or on references to the splendors of the past. Every accusation, even if it is uttered in ladies' society, ought to be formulated with all possible definiteness. Or it is not an accusation, but idle disparagement, unworthy of decent people. I am an old man, I have been lecturing for 30 years, but I notice neither degeneration nor lack of ideals, and I don't find that the present is worse than the past. My porter Nicolay, whose experience of this subject has its value, says that the students of today are neither better nor worse than those of the past. If I were asked what I don't like in my pupils of today, I should answer the question not straight off and not at length, but with sufficient definiteness. I know their failings, and so have no need to resort to vague generalities. I don't like their smoking, using spirituous beverages, marrying late, and often being so irresponsible and careless that they will let one of their number be starving in their midst, while they neglect to pay their subscriptions to the Students' Aid Society. They don't know modern languages, and they don't express themselves correctly in Russian. No longer ago than yesterday, my colleague, the professor of hygiene, complained to me that he had to give twice as many lectures because the students had a very poor knowledge of physics and were utterly ignorant of meteorology. They are readily carried away by the influence of the last new writers, even when they are not first-rate, but they take absolutely no interest in classics such as Shakespeare, Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, or Pascal. And this inability to distinguish the great from the small betrays their ignorance of practical life. More than anything, all difficult questions that have more or less a social character, for instance the migration question, they settle by studying monographs on the subject, but not by way of scientific investigation or experiment, though that method is at their disposal and is more in keeping with their calling. They gladly become ward surgeons, assistants, demonstrators, external teachers, and are ready to fill such posts until they are 40. Though independence, a sense of freedom, and personal initiative are no less necessary in science than, for instance, in art or commerce, I have pupils and listeners, but no successors and helpers, and so I love them and am touched by them, but am not proud of them, and so on and so on. Such shortcomings, however numerous they may be, can only give rise to a pessimistic or fault-finding temper in a faint-hearted and timid man. All these failings have a casual, transitory character and are completely dependent on conditions of life. In some 10 years, they will have disappeared or given place to other fresh defects, which are all inevitable and will in their turn alarm the faint-hearted. The student's sins often vex me, but that vexation is nothing in comparison with the joy I have been experiencing now for the last 30 years when I talk to my pupils, lecture to them, watch their relations, and compare them with people not of their circle. Mihail Fyodorovich speaks evil of everything. Katia listens, and neither of them notices into what depths the apparently innocent diversion of finding fault with their neighbors is gradually drawing them. They are not conscious how by degrees simple talk passes into malicious mockery and jeering, and how they are both beginning to drop into the habits and methods of slander. Killing types one meets with, says Mihail Fyodorovich. I went yesterday to our friend Yegor Petrovich's, and there I found a studious gentleman, one of your medicals in his third year, I believe, such a face in the Dobrolubov style, the imprint of profound thought on his brow. We got into talk. Such doings, young man, said Roman. One I've read, said I, that some German I've forgotten his name has created from the human brain a new kind of alkaloid idiotin. What do you think? He believed it, and there was positively an expression of respect on his face, as though to say, see what we fellows can do. And the other day I went to the theater. I took my seat in the next row. Directly in front of me were sitting two men, one of us fellows, and apparently a law student, the other a shaggy-looking figure, a medical student. The latter was as drunk as a cobbler. He did not look at the stage at all. He was dozing with his nose on his shirt front. But as soon as an actor begins loudly reciting a monologue, or simply raises his voice, our friend starts, pokes his neighbor in the ribs, and asks, what is he saying? Is it elevating? Yes, answers one of our fellows. Bravo, roars the medical student, elevating. Bravo. He had gone to the theater, you see, the drunken blockhead. not for the sake of art, the play, but for elevation. He wanted noble sentiments. Katia listens and laughs. She has a strange laugh. She catches her breath in rhythmically regular gasps, very much as though she were playing the accordion, and nothing in her face is laughing. But her nostrils, I grow depressed, and don't know what to say beside myself. I fire up, leap up from my seat, and cry. Do leave off, why are you sitting here like two toads poisoning the air? With your breath, give over. And without waiting for them to finish their gossip, I prepare to go home. And indeed it is high time, it is past 10. I will stay a little longer, says Mihail Fyodorovich. Will you allow me, Ekaterina Vladimirovna? I will, answers Katia. Benny, in that case, have up another little bottle. They both accompany me with candles to the hall, and while I put on my fur coat, Mihail Fyodorovich says, You have grown dreadfully thin and older-looking, Nikolay Stepanovich. What's the matter with you? Are you ill? Yes, I am not very well. And you are not doing anything for it, Katia puts in grimly. Why don't you can't go on like that? God helps those who help themselves, my dear fellow. Remember me to your wife and daughter. And make my apologies for not having been to see them in a day or two. Before I go abroad, I shall come to say goodbye. I shall be sure to. I am going away next week. I come away from Katia irritated and alarmed by what has been said about my being ill and dissatisfied with myself. I ask myself whether I really ought not to consult one of my colleagues, and at once I imagine how my colleague, after listening to me, would walk away to the window. Without speaking, would think a moment, then would turn round to me, and trying to prevent my reading the truth in his face, would say in a careless tone, So far I see nothing serious. But at the same time, collega, I advise you to lay aside your work, and that would deprive me of my last hope. Who is without hope now that I am diagnosing my illness and prescribing for myself from time to time? I hope that I am deceived by my own illness, that I am mistaken in regard to the albumin and the sugar I find, and in regard to my heart, and in regard to the swellings I have twice noticed in the mornings, when with the fervor of the hypochondriac, I look through the textbooks of therapeutics, and take a different medicine every day. I keep fancying that I shall hit upon something comforting. All that is petty. Whether the sky is covered with clouds or the moon, and the stars are shining, I turn my eyes towards it every evening, and think that death is taking me soon. One would think that my thoughts at such times ought to be deep as the sky, brilliant, striking. But no, I think about myself, about my wife, about Lisa Necker, the students, people in general. My thoughts are evil, petty, I am insincere with myself. And at such times my theory of life may be expressed in the words the celebrated Eric Cheev said in one of his intimate letters, Nothing good can exist in the world without evil. And there is more evil than good, that is, everything is disgusting. There is nothing to live for. And the 62 years I have already lived must be reckoned as wasted. I catch myself in these thoughts, and try to persuade myself that they are accidental, temporary, and not deeply rooted in me, but at once I think. If so, what drives me every evening to those two toads? And I vow to myself that I will never go to Katia's again, though I know I shall go next evening. Ringing the bell at the door and going upstairs, I feel that I have no family now and no desire to bring it back again. It is clear that the new Eric Chief thoughts are not casual, temporary visitors, but have possession of my whole being, with my conscience ill at ease, dejected, languid, hardly able to move my limbs, feeling as though tons were added to my weight. I get into bed and quickly drop asleep. And then insomnia. Roman 4. Summer comes on and life is changed. One fine morning Lisa comes in to me and says in a jesting tone, Come, Your Excellency, we are ready. My Excellency is conducted into the street and seated in a cab. As I go along, having nothing to do, I read the signboards from right to left. The word tractor reads Rickcart. That would just suit some baron's family, Baroness Rickcart. Farther on I drive through fields by the graveyard, which makes absolutely no impression on me, though I shall soon lie in it. Then I drive by forests, and again by fields. There is nothing of interest. After 2 hours of driving, my Excellency is conducted into the lower story of a summer villa, and installed in a small, very cheerful little room with light blue hangings. At night there is sleeplessness as before, but in the morning I do not put a good face upon it, and listen to my wife, but lie in bed. I do not sleep, but lie in the drowsy, half-conscious condition, in which you know you are not asleep. But dreaming at midday, I get up and from habit sit down at my table, but I do not work now. I amuse myself with French books in yellow covers, sent me by Katia, of course. it would be more patriotic to read Russian authors. But I must confess I cherish no particular liking for them, with the exception of two or three of the older writers all our literature of. Today strikes me as not being literature, but a special sort of home industry, which exists simply in order to be encouraged, though people do not readily make use of its products. The very best of these home products cannot be called remarkable, and cannot be sincerely praised without qualification. I must say the same of all the literary novelties I have read during the last 10 or 15 years. Not one of them is remarkable, and not one of them can be praised without a but cleverness, a good tone, but no talent, a good tone, but no cleverness or talent, cleverness, but not a good tone. I don't say the French books have talent, cleverness, and a good tone. They don't satisfy me either, but they are not so tedious as the Russian, and it is not unusual to find in them the chief element of artistic creation, feeling of personal freedom, which is lacking in the Russian authors. I don't remember one new book in which the author does not try from the first page to entangle himself in all sorts of conditions and contracts with his conscience. One is afraid to speak of the naked body, another ties himself up hand and foot in psychological analysis, a third must have a warm attitude to man, a fourth purposely scrawls whole descriptions of nature, that he may not be suspected of writing with a purpose. One is bent upon being middle class in his work, another must be a nobleman. And so on. There is intentionalness, circumspection, and self-will, but they have neither the independence nor the manliness to write as they like, and therefore there is no creativeness. All this applies to what is called Bellis letters. As for serious treatises in Russian on sociology, for instance on art, and so on, I do not read them simply from timidity. In my childhood and early youth, I had for some reason a terror of doorkeepers and attendants at the theater, and that terror has remained with me to this day. I am afraid of them, even now. It is said that we are only afraid of what we do not understand. And indeed it is very difficult to understand why doorkeepers and theater attendants are so dignified, haughty, and majestically rude. I feel exactly the same terror when I read serious articles, their extraordinary dignity, their bantering, lordly tone, their familiar manner to foreign authors, their ability to split straws with dignity, all that is beyond my understanding. It is intimidating, and utterly unlike the quiet, gentlemanly tone to which I am accustomed when I read the works of our medical and scientific writers. It oppresses me to read not only the articles written by serious Russians, but even works translated or edited by them. The pretentious, edifying tone of the preface, the redundancy of remarks made by the translator, which prevent me from concentrating my attention, the question marks, and sick in parenthesis, scattered all over the book or article by the liberal translator, are to my mind an outrage on the author and on my independence as a reader. Once I was summoned as an expert to a circuit court. In an interval, one of my fellow experts drew my attention to the rudeness of the public prosecutor, to the defendants, among whom there were two ladies of good education. I believe I did not exaggerate at all when I told him that the prosecutor's manner was no ruder than that of the authors of serious articles to one another. Their manners are indeed so rude that I cannot speak of them without distaste. They treat one another and the writers they criticize either with superfluous respect at the sacrifice of their own dignity, or on the contrary with far more ruthlessness than I have shown in my notes and my thoughts in regard to my future son-in-law Necker. Accusations of irrationality, of evil intentions, and indeed of every sort of crime, form an habitual ornament of serious articles, and that, as young medical men are fond of saying in their monographs, is the ultima ratio. Such ways must infallibly have an effect on the morals of the younger generation of writers. And so I am not at all surprised that, in the new works with which our literature has been enriched during the last 10 or 15 years, the heroes drink too much vodka, and the heroines are not overchaste. I read French books, and I look out of the window, which is open. I can see the spikes of my garden fence, 2 or 3 scraggy trees, and beyond the fence the road, the fields, and beyond them a broad stretch of pine wood. Often I admire a boy and girl, both flaxen-headed and ragged, who clamber on the fence and laugh at my baldness in their shining little eyes. I read Go up, thou bald head. They are almost the only people who care nothing for my celebrity or my rank. Visitors do not come to me every day now. I will only mention the visits of Nikolay and Pyotr Ignatievich. Nikolay usually comes to me on holidays with some pretext of business, though really to see me, he arrives very much exhilarated, a thing which never occurs to him in the winter. What have you to tell me, I ask, going out to him in the hall. Your Excellency, he says, pressing his hand to his heart, and looking at me with the ecstasy of a lovelier excellency. God be my witness. Strike me dead on the spot, gaudimus egitur juventus. And he greedily kisses me on the shoulder, on the sleeve, and on the buttons. Is everything going well? I ask him. Your Excellency, so help me God. He persists in groveling before me for no sort of reason, and soon bores me, so I send him away to the kitchen where they give him dinner. Pyotr Ignatievich comes to see me on holidays too, with the special object of seeing me, and sharing his thoughts with me. He usually sits down near my table, modest, neat, and reasonable, and does not venture to cross his legs or put his elbows on the table all the time. In a soft, even little voice, in rounded, bookish phrases, he tells me various, to his mind, very interesting and piquant items of news which he has read in the magazines and journals. They are all alike, and may be reduced to this type. A Frenchman has made a discovery. Someone else, a German, has denounced him, proving that the discovery was made in 1870 by some American, while a third person, also a German, trumps them both by proving they both had made fools of themselves, mistaking bubbles of air for dark pigment under the microscope, even when he wants to amuse me. Pyotr Ignatievich tells me things in the same lengthy, circumstantial manner, as though he were defending a thesis, enumerating in detail the literary sources from which he is deriving his narrative, doing his utmost to be accurate as to the date and number of the journals, and the name of every one concerned, invariably mentioning it in full. Jean Jacques Petty, never simply Petty. Sometimes he stays to dinner with us, and then during the whole of dinner time, he goes on telling me the same sort of piquant anecdotes, reducing everyone at table to a state of dejected boredom. If Necker and Lisa begin talking before him of fugues and counterpoint, Brahms and Bach, he drops his eyes modestly, and is overcome with embarrassment. He is ashamed that such trivial subjects should be discussed before such serious people as him and me. In my present state of mind, 5 minutes of him is enough to sicken me, as though I had been seeing and hearing him for an eternity. I hate the poor fellow. His soft, smooth voice and bookish language exhaust me, and his stories stupefy me. He cherishes the best of feelings for me, and talks to me simply in order to give me pleasure. And I repay him by looking at him, as though I wanted to hypnotize him, and think go, 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 but he is not amenable to thought suggestion, and sits on and on and on. While he is with me, I can never shake off the thought it's possible, when I die, he will be appointed to succeed me, and my poor lecture hall presents itself to me as an oasis in which the spring is dried up, and I am ungracious, silent, and surly with Pyotr Ignatievich, as though he were to blame for such thoughts, and not I myself, when he begins as usual praising up the German savants. Instead of making fun of him good-humoredly, as I used to do, I mutter sullenly, "Asses, your Germans." That is like the late Professor Nikita Krylov, who once, when he was bathing with Pirogov at Revel, and vexed at the waters being very cold, burst out with, "Scoundrels, these Germans, I behave badly with Pyotr Ignatievich, and only when he is going away, and from the window I catch a glimpse of his gray hat behind the garden fence, I want to call out and say, 'Forgive me, my dear fellow.'" Dinner is even drearier than in the winter. Necker, whom now I hate and despise, dines with us almost every day. I used to endure his presence in silence. Now I aim biting remarks at him, which make my wife and daughter blush. Carried away by evil feeling, I often say things that are simply stupid, and I don't know why I say them. So on one occasion it happened that I stared a long time at Necker, and apropos of nothing I fired off. An eagle may perchance swoop down below a cock, but never will the fowl soar upwards to the clouds. And the most vexatious thing is that the foul Necker shows himself much cleverer than the eagle professor. Knowing that my wife and daughter are on his side, he takes up the line of meeting my jibes with condescending silence, as though to say, "The old chap is in his dotage, what's the use of talking to him?" Or he makes fun of me good-naturedly. It is wonderful how petty a man may become. I am capable of dreaming all dinner time of how Necker will turn out to be an adventurer, how my wife and Lisa will come to see their mistake, and how I will taunt Themen such absurd thoughts at the time when I am standing with one foot in the grave. There are now two misunderstandings of which in the old days I had no idea, except from hearsay, though I am ashamed of it. I will describe one that occurred the other day after dinner. I was sitting in my room smoking a pipe. My wife came in, as usual, sat down, and began saying what a good thing it would be for me to go to Kharkov now while it is warm, and I have free time, and there find out what sort of person our Necker is. "Very good, I will go," I assented. My wife, pleased with me, got up and was going to the door, but turned back and said, "By the way, I have another favor to ask of you. I know you will be angry, but it is my duty to warn you, forgive my saying it, Nikolay Stepanovich. But all our neighbors and acquaintances have begun talking about your being so often at Katia's. She is clever and well-educated. I don't deny that her company may be agreeable. But at your age, and with your social position, it seems strange that you should find pleasure in her society. Besides, she has such a reputation that all the blood suddenly rushed to my brain, my eyes flashed fire. I leaped up and clutching at my head, and stamping my feet shouted in a voice unlike my own. Let me alone, let me alone, let me alone. Probably my face was terrible, my voice was strange, for my wife suddenly turned pale, and began shrieking aloud in a despairing voice that was utterly unlike her own Lisa Necker. Then Yeager came running in at our shouts. Let me alone, I cried, let me alone, go away. My legs turned numb as though they had ceased to exist. I felt myself falling into someone's arms for a little while. I still heard weeping, then sank into a swoon, which lasted 2 or 3 hours. Now about Katia, she comes to see me every day towards evening, and of course, neither the neighbors nor our acquaintances can avoid noticing it. She comes in for a minute and carries me off for a drive with her. She has her own horse, and a new chaise bought this summer altogether. She lives in an expensive style. She has taken a big detached villa with a large garden, and has taken all her town retinue with Hurtwo maids, a coachman. I often ask her, Katia, what will you live on when you have spent your father's money? Then we shall see, she answers. That money, my dear, deserves to be treated more seriously. It was earned by a good man by honest labor. You have told me that already, I know it. At first we drive through the open country, then through the pine wood which is visible from my window. Nature seems to me as beautiful as it always has been, though some evil spirit whispers to me that these pines and fir trees, birds and white clouds on the sky will not notice my absence when in 3 or 4 months I am dead. Katia loves driving, and she is pleased that it is fine weather and that I am sitting beside her. She is in good spirits and does not say harsh things. You are a very good man, Nikolay Stepanovich. She says you are a rare specimen, and there isn't an actor who would understand how to play you. Me, or Mihail Fyodorovich, for instance, any poor actor could do, but not you, and I envy you. I envy you horribly. Do you know what I stand for? What? She ponders for a minute and then asks me. Nikolay Stepanovich, I am a negative phenomenon, yes. Yes, I answer. What am I to do? What answer was I to make her? It is easy to say work, or give your possessions to the poor, or know yourself. And because it is so easy to say that, I don't know what to answer. My colleagues, when they teach therapeutics, advise the individual study of each separate case one has, but to obey this advice to gain the conviction that the methods recommended in the textbooks as the best, and as providing a safe basis for treatment, turn out to be quite unsuitable in individual cases. It is just the same in moral ailments. But I must make some answer, and I say, you have too much free time, my dear. You absolutely must take up some occupation. After all, why shouldn't you be an actress again, if it is your vocation? I cannot. Your tone and manner suggest that you are a victim. I don't like that, my dear. It is your own fault. Remember, you began with falling out with people and methods. But you have done nothing to make either better. You did not struggle with evil, but were cast down by it. And you are not the victim of the struggle, but of your own impotence. Well, of course, you were young and inexperienced then. Now it may all be different. Yes, really go on the stage. You will work. You will serve a sacred art. Don't pretend. Nikolay Stepanovich. Katia interrupts me. Let us make a compact once for all. We will talk about actors, actresses, and authors, but we will let art alone. You are a splendid and rare person, but you don't know enough about art sincerely to think it's sacred. You have no instinct or feeling for art. You have been hard at work all your life and have not had time to acquire that feeling altogether. I don't like talk about art, she goes on nervously. I don't like it, and my goodness, how they have vulgarized it. Who has vulgarized it? They have vulgarized it by drunkenness, the newspapers, by their familiar attitude, clever people, by philosophy. Philosophy has nothing to do with it. Yes, it has. If anyone philosophizes about it, it shows he does not understand it. To avoid bitterness, I hasten to change the subject, and then sit a long time silent. Only when we are driving out of the wood, and turning towards Katia's villa, I go back to my former question and say, you have still not answered me, why you don't want to go on the stage. Nikolay Stepanovich, this is cruel, she cries, and suddenly flushes all over. You want me to tell you the truth? Aloud, very well if you like it, I have no talent, no talent, and a great deal of vanity, so there. After making this confession, she turns her face away from me, and to hide the trembling of her hands, tugs violently at the reins. As we are driving towards her villa, we see Mihail Fyodorovich walking near the gate, impatiently awaiting us. That Mihail Fyodorovich again, says Katya, with vexation, do rid me of him, please, I am sick and tired of him, bother him. Mihail Fyodorovich ought to have gone abroad long ago, but he puts off going from week to week of late. There have been certain changes in him. He looks as it were sunken, has taken to drinking, until he is tipsy, a thing which never used to happen to him, and his black eyebrows are beginning to turn gray. When our chaise stops at the gate, he does not conceal his joy, and his impatience. He fussily helps me and Katya out, hurriedly asks questions, laughs, rubs his hands, and that gentle, imploring, pure expression which I used to notice only in his eyes is now suffused all over his face. He is glad, and at the same time, he is ashamed of his gladness, ashamed of his habit of spending every evening with Katya, and he thinks it necessary to explain his visit by some obvious absurdity, such as I was driving by, and I thought I would just look in for a minute. We all three go indoors first, we drink tea, then the familiar packs of cards, the big piece of cheese, the fruit, and the bottle of Crimean champagne are put upon the table. The subjects of our conversation are not new, they are just the same as in the winter. We fall foul of the university, the students, and literature, and the theater. The air grows thick and stifling with evil speaking, and poisoned by the breath not of two toads as in the winter, but of three, besides the velvety baritone laugh, and the giggle like the gasp of a concertina. The maid who waits upon us hears an unpleasant cracked hee-hee like the chuckle of a general in a vaudeville. Avi. There are terrible nights with thunder, lightning, rain, and wind, such as are called among the people sparrow nights. There has been one such night in my personal life. I woke up after midnight and leaped suddenly out of bed. It seemed to me for some reason that I was just immediately going to die. Why did it seem so? I had no sensation in my body that suggested my immediate death, but my soul was oppressed with terror, as though I had suddenly seen a vast, menacing glow of fire. I rapidly struck a light, drank some water straight out of the decanter, then hurried to the open window. The weather outside was magnificent. There was a smell of hay and some other very sweet scent. I could see the spikes of the fence, the gaunt, drowsy trees, by the window the road, the dark streak of woodland. There was a serene, very bright moon in the sky, and not a single cloud, perfect stillness, not one leaf stirring. I felt that everything was looking at me and waiting for me to die. It was uncanny. I closed the window and ran to my bed. I felt for my pulse, and not finding it in my wrist, tried to find it in my temple, then in my chin, and again in my wrist. And everything I touched was cold and clammy with sweat. My breathing came more and more rapidly. My body was shivering. All my inside was in commotion. I had a sensation on my face and on my bald head, as though they were covered with spiders' webs. What should I do? Call my family? No, it would be no use. I could not imagine what my wife and Lisa would do when they came in to me. I hid my head under the pillow, closed my eyes, and waited and waited. My spine was cold, it seemed to be drawn inwards, and I felt as though death were coming upon me stealthily from behind. Kivi kivi, I heard a sudden shriek in the night stillness, and did not know where it was, in my breast or in the street. Kivi. Kivi? My God, how terrible! I would have drunk some more water. But by then it was fearful to open my eyes, and I was afraid to raise my head. I was possessed by unaccountable animal terror. And I cannot understand why I was so frightened. Was it that I wanted to live, or that some new unknown pain was in store for me? Upstairs overhead someone moaned or laughed. I listened soon afterwards. There was a sound of footsteps on the stairs. Someone came hurriedly down, then went up again. A minute later, there was a sound of steps downstairs again. Someone stopped near my door and listened. "Who is there?" I cried. The door opened. I boldly opened my eyes and saw my wife. Her face was pale, and her eyes were tear-stained. "You are not asleep, Nikolay Stepanovich?" she asked. "What is it? For God's sake, go up and have a look at Lisa. There is something the matter with her." "Very good, with pleasure," I muttered, greatly relieved at not being alone. "Very good this minute." I followed my wife, heard what she said to me, and was too agitated to understand a word. Patches of light from her candle danced about the stairs. Our long shadows trembled. My feet caught in the skirts of my dressing gown. I gasped for breath and felt as though something were pursuing me and trying to catch me from behind. I shall die on the spot, here on the staircase, I thought. On the spot. But we passed the staircase, the dark corridor with the Italian windows, and went into Lisa's room. She was sitting on the bed in her nightdress, with her bare feet hanging down, and she was moaning. Oh my God, she was muttering, screwing up her eyes at our candle. I can't bear it. Lisa, my child, I said, what is it? Seeing me, she began crying out and flung herself on my neck. My kind papa, she sobbed me, dear good papa, my darling, my pet. I don't know what is the matter with me, I am miserable. She hugged me, kissed me, and babbled fond words I used to hear from her when she was a child. Calm yourself, my child, God be with you, I said. There is no need to cry, I am miserable too. I tried to tuck her, and my wife gave her water, and we awkwardly stumbled by her bedside, my shoulder jostled against her shoulder, and meanwhile, I was thinking how we used to give our children their bath together. Help her, my wife implored me, do something. What could I do? I could do nothing. There was some load on the girl's heart, but I did not understand. I knew nothing about it, and could only mutter. It's nothing, it will pass, sleep, sleep. To make things worse, there was a sudden sound of dogs howling, at first subdued and uncertain, then loud, two dogs howling together. I had never attached significance to such omens as the howling of dogs or the shrieking of owls. But on that occasion, it sent a pang to my heart, and I hastened to explain the howl to myself. It's nonsense, I thought, the influence of one organism on another, the intensely strained condition of my nerves, has infected my wife Lisa. The dog that is all such infection explains presentiments, forebodings. When a little later I went back to my room to write a prescription for Lisa, I no longer thought I should die at once, but only had such a weight, such a feeling of oppression in my soul, that I felt actually sorry that I had not died on the spot for a long time. I stood motionless in the middle of the room, pondering what to prescribe for Lisa, but the moans overhead ceased, and I decided to prescribe nothing, and yet I went on standing there. There was a death-like stillness, such a stillness as some author has expressed it. It rang in one's ears. Time passed slowly. The streaks of moonlight on the windowsill did not shift their position, but seemed as though frozen. It was still some time before dawn. But the gate in the fence creaked. Someone stole in, and breaking a twig from one of those scraggy trees, cautiously tapped on the window with it. Nikolay Stepanovich, I heard a whisper, Nikolay Stepanovich. I opened the window, and fancied I was dreaming. Under the window, huddled against the wall, stood a woman, in a black dress, with the moonlight bright upon her, looking at me with great eyes. Her face was pale, stern, and weird-looking in the moonlight, like marble. Her chin was quivering. It is I, she said, Roman 1 Katia. In the moonlight, all women's eyes look big and black, all people look taller and paler, and that was probably why I had not recognized her for the first minute. What is it? Forgive me, she said. I suddenly felt unbearably miserable. I couldn't stand it, so came here. There was a light in your window, and I ventured to knock. I beg your pardon. Ah, if you knew how miserable I am. What are you doing just now? Nothing, I can't sleep. I had a feeling that there was something wrong, but that is nonsense. Her brows were lifted, her eyes shone with tears, and her whole face was lighted up with the familiar look of trustfulness, which I had not seen for so long. Nikolay Stepanovich, she said imploringly, stretching out both hands to me, my precious friend, I beg you, I implore you, if you don't despise my affection and respect for you, consent to what I ask of you. What is it? Take my money from me. Come, what an idea. What do I want with your money? Y'all go away somewhere for your health. You ought to go for your health. Will you take it? Yes, Nikolay Stepanovich, darling, yes. She looked greedily into my face and repeated, yes, you will take it. No, my dear, I won't take it, I said, thank you. She turned her back upon me and bowed her head. Probably I refused her in a tone which made further conversation about money impossible. Go home to bed, I said, we will see each other tomorrow. So you don't consider me your friend? She asked dejectedly. I don't say that, but your money would be no use to me now. I beg your pardon, she said, dropping her voice a whole octave. I understand you to be indebted to a person like me, a retired actress, but goodbye. And she went away so quickly that I had not time even to say goodbye. Roman 6. I am in Kharkov, as it would be useless to contend against my present mood, and indeed beyond my power. I have made up my mind that the last days of my life shall at least be irreproachable externally. If I am unjust in regard to my wife and daughter, which I fully recognize, I will try and do as she wishes. Since she wants me to go to Kharkov, I go to Kharkov. Besides, I have become of late so indifferent to everything that it is really all the same to me where I go to Kharkov, or to Paris, or to Berdichev. I arrived here at midday and have put up at the hotel, not far from the cathedral. The train was jolting, there were drafts, and now I am sitting on my bed holding my head and expecting tic douloureux. I ought to have gone today to see some professors of my acquaintance, but I have neither strength nor inclination. The old corridor attendant comes in and asks whether I have brought my bed linen. I detain him for 5 minutes and put several questions to him about Necker, on whose account I have come here. The attendant turns out to be a native of Kharkov. He knows the town like the fingers of his hand, but does not remember any household of the surname of Necker. I question him about the estate, same answer. The clock in the corridor strikes one, then two, then three. These last months, in which I am waiting for death, seem much longer than the whole of my life. And I have never before been so ready to resign myself to the slowness of time, as now in the old days, when one sat in the station and waited for a train or presided in an examination room. A quarter of an hour would seem an eternity now. I can sit all night on my bed without moving and quite unconcernedly reflect that tomorrow will be followed by another night as long and colorless, and the day after tomorrow. In the corridor it strikes 5, 6, 7, it grows dark. There is a dull pain in my cheek, the tick beginning to occupy myself with thoughts. I go back to my old point of view, when I was not so indifferent, and ask myself, why a distinguished man, a privy councillor, am sitting in this little hotel room on this bed, with the unfamiliar gray quilt. Why am I looking at that cheap tin washing stand, and listening to the whir of the wretched clock in the corridor? Is all this in keeping with my fame and my lofty position? And I answer these questions with a jeer. I am amused by the naivete with which I used in my youth to exaggerate the value of renown and of the exceptional position which celebrities are supposed to enjoy. I am famous, my name is pronounced with reverence. My portrait has been both in the Neva and in the Illustrated News of the World. I have read my biography even in a German magazine. And what of all that, here I am sitting utterly alone in a strange town on a strange bed, rubbing my aching cheek with my hand. Domestic worries, the hard-heartedness of creditors, the rudeness of the railway, servants, the inconveniences of the passport system, the expensive and unwholesome food in the refreshment rooms, the general rudeness and coarseness in social intercourse. This, and a great deal more which would take too long to reckon up, affects me as much as any working man who is famous only in his alley. In what way does my exceptional position find expression? Admitting that I am celebrated 1,000 times over, that I am a hero of whom my country is proud, they publish bulletins of my illness in every paper, letters of sympathy come to me by post from my colleagues, my pupils, the general public. But all that does not prevent me from dying in a strange bed, in misery, in utter loneliness. Of course, no one is to blame for that, but I in my foolishness dislike my popularity. I feel as though it had cheated me. At 10 o'clock I fall asleep, and in spite of the tic I sleep soundly, and should have gone on sleeping if I had not been awakened soon after one. Came a sudden knock at the door. Who is there? A telegram. You might have waited till tomorrow, I say, angrily taking the telegram from the attendant. Now, I shall not get to sleep again. I am sorry your light was burning, so I thought you were not asleep. I tear open the telegram and look first at the signature from my wife. What does she want? Necker was secretly married to Lisa yesterday. Return. I read the telegram, and my dismay does not last long. I am dismayed not by what Lisa and Necker have done, but by the indifference with which I hear of their marriage. They say philosophers, and the truly wise are indifferent. It is false indifference, is the paralysis of the soul, it is premature death. I go to bed again and begin trying to think of something to occupy my mind. What am I to think about? I feel as though everything had been thought over already, and there is nothing which could hold my attention now. When daylight comes, I sit up in bed with my arms round my knees, and to pass the time I try to know myself. Know thyself is excellent and useful advice. It is only a pity that the ancients never thought to indicate the means of following this precept. When I have wanted to understand somebody or myself, I have considered not the actions in which everything is relative, but the desires. Tell me what you want, and I will tell you what manner of man you are. And now I examine myself. What do I want? I want our wives, our children, our friends, our pupils to love in us, not our fame, not the brand, and not the label, but to love us as ordinary men. Anything else I should like to have had helpers and successors. Anything else I should like to wake up in 100 years' time, and to have just a peep out of one eye at what is happening in science. I should have liked to have lived another 10 years. What further? Why nothing further? I think and think. And can think of nothing more, and however much I might think, and however far my thoughts might travel, it is clear to me that there is nothing vital, nothing of great importance in my desires, in my passion for science, in my desire to live, in this sitting on a strange bed, and in this striving to know myself in all the thoughts, feelings, and ideas I form about everything. There is no common bond to connect it all into one whole. Every feeling and every thought exists apart in me, and in all my criticisms of science, the theater, literature, my pupils, and in all the pictures my imagination draws, even the most skillful analyst could not find what is called a general idea or the God of a living man. And if there is not that, then there is nothing. In a state so poverty-stricken, a serious ailment, the fear of death, the influences of circumstance and men, were enough to turn upside down and scatter in fragments all which I had once looked upon as my theory of life, and in which I had seen the meaning and joy of my existence. So there is nothing surprising in the fact that I have overshadowed the last months of my life with thoughts and feelings only worthy of a slave and barbarian, and that now I am indifferent and take no heed of the dawn. When a man has not in him what is loftier and mightier than all external impressions, a bad cold is really enough to upset his equilibrium, and make him begin to see an owl in every bird, to hear a dog howling in every sound, and all his pessimism or optimism with his thoughts, great and small, have at such times significance as symptoms and nothing more. I am vanquished if it is so. It is useless to think, it is useless to talk. I will sit and wait in silence for what is to come. In the morning, the corridor attendant brings me tea and a copy of the local newspaper. Mechanically, I read the advertisements on the first page, the leading article, the extracts from the newspapers, and journals, the chronicle of events in the latter. I find, among other things, the following paragraph: Our distinguished savant Professor Nikolay Stepanovich, so-and-so, arrived yesterday in Kharkov, and is staying in the so-and-so hotel. Apparently illustrious names are created to live on their own account apart from those that bear them. Now my name is promenading tranquilly about Kharkov. In another 3 months, printed in gold letters on my monument, it will shine bright as the sun itself, while I shall be already under the moss. A light tap at the door. Somebody wants me. Who is there? Come in. The door opens, and I step back surprised, and hurriedly wrap my dressing gown round me. Before me stands Katia. How do you do? She says, breathless, with running upstairs. You didn't expect me. I have come here too. I have come too. She sits down and goes on, hesitating and not looking at me. Why don't you speak to me? I have come too today. I found out that you were in this hotel and have come to you. Very glad to see you, I say, shrugging my shoulders, but I am surprised. You seem to have dropped from the skies. What have you come for? Oh, I've simply come. Silence. Suddenly, she jumps up impulsively and comes to me. Nikolay Stepanovich, she says, turning pale and pressing her hands on her bosom. Nikolay Stepanovich, I cannot go on living like this. I cannot, for God's sake, tell me quickly this minute what I am to do. Tell me, what am I to do? What can I tell you? I ask in perplexity. I can do nothing. Tell me, I beseech you. She goes on, breathing hard and trembling all over. I swear that I cannot go on living like this. It's too much for me. She sinks on a chair and begins sobbing. She flings her head back, wrings her hands, taps with her feet. Her hat falls off and hangs bobbing on its elastic. Her hair is ruffled. Help me, she implores me. I cannot go on. She takes her handkerchief out of her traveling bag, and with it pulls out several letters which fall from her lap to the floor. I pick them up, and on one of them I recognize the handwriting of Mihail Fyodorovich, and accidentally read a bit of a word: passionate. There is nothing I can tell you, Katia, I say. Help me, she sobs, clutching at my hand and kissing it. You are my father, you know, my only friend. You are clever, educated, you have lived so long, you have been a teacher. Tell me, what am I to do? Upon my word, Katia, I don't know. I am utterly at a loss and confused, touched by her sobs, and hardly able to stand. Let us have lunch, Katia, I say, with a forced smile. Give over crying. And at once I add in a sinking voice, I shall soon be gone, Katia. Only one word, only one word. She weeps, stretching out her hands to me. What am I to do? You are a queer girl, really, I mutter. I don't understand it. So sensible, and all at once crying your eyes out. A silence follows. Katia straightens her hair, puts on her hat, then crumples up the letters and stuffs them in her bag, and all this deliberately in silence. Her face, her bosom, and her gloves are wet with tears, but her expression now is cold and forbidding I look at her and feel ashamed that I am happier than she. The absence of what my philosophically colleagues call a general idea, I have detected in myself only just before death in the decline of my days, while the soul of this poor girl has known, and will know no refuge all her life, all her life. Let us have lunch, Katia, I say. No thank you, she answers coldly. Another minute passes in silence. I don't like Kharkov, I say, it's so gray hair, such a gray town. Yes, perhaps it's ugly. I am here not for long, passing through. I am going on today. Where? To the Crimea, that is to the Caucasus. Oh, for long. I don't know. Katia gets up and with a cold smile holds out her hand without looking at me. I want to ask her, then you won't be at my funeral, but she does not look at me, her hand is cold. And as it were strange, I escort her to the door in silence. She goes out, walks down the long corridor without looking back. She knows that I am looking after her, and most likely she will look back at the turn. No, she did not look back. I have seen her black dress. For the last time, her steps have died away. Farewell, my treasure.